Greetings, folks. This is Scott with the Game Audio Institute, and we are going into our first scripting lesson, which is a real simple thing. And basically, we're going to be doing a situation where basically character is going to run through a block, and it will make a sound when they run through it. So it'll be like basically a trigger script. So stay tuned. So the deal in this particular case is we're going to be using a physics component that's extremely vital to pretty much most game engines, and this was called a collider, okay? So the collider essentially is there to give a sense of solidity to whatever objects you are applying it to, essentially. So in this particular case, for example, if I start the game up and I have the sound playing on Awake right there, right? But then I have my character walking around inside the space. That's basically going to be, the deal in terms of, oh, well, the reason why I don't fall through the ground, and the reason why I can't walk past this wall is because there are these objects called colliders, or components called colliders. If I removed the collider from that component, I could totally just walk through this wall, no problem. All right? And I could do all kinds of other things. So the collider is going to be the most important, one of the more important characteristics that we're going to be dealing with, okay? So that's going to be a really important kind of thing that we're going to be working with. All right, so a collider, though, has a mode that's going to be useful for our particular purposes called a trigger, okay? So in this particular case, if I turn on the trigger, then it means that I'm going to be able to walk through that object as if it was kind of not there, except for the fact that now I have sort of a component that can detect whether I've walked into it, essentially. So, for example, if I choose this trigger, if I don't have the trigger on, for example, and I start the game, and I walk into my little trigger object with the audio source on it, then what happens is it's going to be pretty obvious. I'm going to walk into it, and nothing will happen. I'll just walk right there. So, if I turn on the is trigger option, here we go. Sorry about that. Turn on the is trigger option, then basically I can walk through that game object perfectly fine, as if it was basically not there. But the scripting, the physics scripting basically is going to tell whether I'm actually there, essentially. So we're going to take advantage of that when we write our script, okay? So, and the other thing that we are going to need on this object is, of course, the audio source. All right, so we have an audio source added to this, so that's fine, no problem there. And now we want to create ourselves a script. And I will get you a little bit into the possibility, because this is our first script, we want to kind of talk a little bit about, what we're doing inside the editor and all this other kind of stuff a little bit here. So we're going to go to Add Component. From here, though, we're going to blank out all of the searching options here, and we're going to scroll down, and instead of all of these options here, we're going to basically say go to New Script, essentially, which is all the way at the bottom, and you can't even see it, so let me just fold up a couple things here. Okay, all the way at the bottom, New Script. Bang. Now, here's the point where we want to definitely make sure that we are going to have the script named, because this is the best place to do it. You can name it afterwards, but it becomes a little bit more awkward and difficult. So we're just going to call this one Trigger Sound. Okay? Call it Trigger Sound, and it says Create and Add. And we're going to do that. So once we do that, now we will get our script editor. And once we double-click our Trigger Sound object, we will get our editor. Now, the editor is going to go into what's called restricted mode, I think, at least by default. There's a lot of protections these days that are happening. And so what we're going to do is we're going to explain basically about what all this essentially means. Okay, so first of all, we've got these things that automatically get created whenever we create this whole script. Now, one thing that is really important to understand about C#, scripting in general, really, is that you see that this is called triggersound.cs. Now, also notice here on line 5 that we have public class trigger sound mono behavior. So mono is basically the scripting variant of C# that Unity uses, essentially. It's a version of .NET that's kind of like open source and stuff like that. And the idea is that basically anything that that works inside Unity, directly affects Unity, is usually called a monobehavior. So in this particular case, this name, trigger sound, and this name here at the top, trigger sound, have to be absolutely identical. If they're even by one character wrong, if there's a lowercase t where this one has an uppercase t, that's going to be considered problematic, and it probably won't compile even, which means that your game won't even run at that point. But that's important to understand, is that's why naming it right there at that spot where I was showing you is going to be the best result. It's going to give you the best results. Now, by default, what ends up happening is you're going to get the option to automatically put something on start or update. Okay, so what that means in this particular case is that start is going to be when the game scene starts. But just like Play on Awake, similar to Play on Awake happens when objects come into the scene. Start is the same way. So if an object gets spawned into the scene afterwards, it will have its own start, and it will be different than the actual start of the game itself. So you can put things in start here, and when the object appears in the scene, it'll be considered whenever it appears in the scene, for the first time, essentially. Update, on the other hand, is a little bit more different. That one basically means that every frame it's going to do whatever is in these brackets, essentially. And we're going to look at update. Update's is very important for a lot of things. But one of the things it's not going to be good for is playing sounds, because if you decide to play a sound on update, that means you're going to get something that sounds like granular synthesis. It'll sound like a bunch of sounds triggering as many times as possible. And it really won't make a lot of sense, essentially. So we're not going to be able to do that. All right, so what we want to do, though, in this case, is we want to blank out both of these, all of this stuff. So all we are left with is the brackets. Now, the brackets are really super important in scripting in general, right? We want to make sure that we have an open bracket and closed bracket, and we want to make sure that that happens for all of the functions that we're going to basically define. But we're going to start this out. We're going to talk about kind of what we can do. So now, if you want to do things so where you can edit certain kinds of characteristics, what you're going to do is you're going to type the word public in front of it. So you're going to type public. Public makes it absolutely visible inside the inspector. Whatever I've decided to type after the inspector is going to be there. Now, if you've ever been dealing with any other kinds of scripting languages, this is C#. C# is a little bit different. One of the things that it absolutely has to have is a type declaration. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare a very specific type for Unity that we want, which is an audio source. Oops, sorry. You can see it probably finished there for me. Audio source. There we go. Public audio source, trigger source, or trig source. And then when we do this, we want to finish the assertive statement with a semicolon. And then the next one we want to go is we want to say public audio clip and say sound. Okay? Those are the two things that we're going to declare. Now, if we just typed audio source, trigger source, and audio clip sound, we would not see them in the inspector, which means that we would be forced to have to deal with them in the script, comparatively speaking. Okay? In this case, we're doing it all here in the script, but then it will be exposed. In other words, it will be visible inside the inspector. Okay? All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use a function that refers to the trigger specifically, and it's going to be called void, because voids basically means that it doesn't return anything more than basically the function itself. Nothing there. It's not returning anything other than the function. So basically you say void on trigger enter. It has to be typed exactly as I'm typing it. Okay? So on trigger enter. And the other thing that I want to do is right here. So now what basically it means that when the object enters the trigger, then it will play the sound, okay? In this case, now what I want to do is refer to my trigger source, say trigger source, trig source, dot, and then what we want to do is the function called play one shot. And the characteristic that play one shot has is it needs an audio clip to define what sound it's going to play. And we're going to play the word sound. So here are the conditions that are specific for this kind of scripting situation. So everything has to be absolutely literal. So, for example, that can't be a capital T if this is a lowercase t. Any of these names could be whatever you want them to be. There's a whole flexible thing, but what they cannot be is different between the declaration and the sort of application of that, essentially. So the idea is the declaration of this sort of stuff, it's called a trigger source. That means it has to be referred to here as trigger source. If I have my audio clip of sound with a lowercase s, then it has to be referred to as a lowercase s over here. Okay? So that's really important to keep in mind. Computers are incredibly literal, so absolutely everything has to be precisely put in exactly as typed. And if it's one character off, then everything's going to be wrong. So, for example, if I say left out my semicolon here at the end of this statement, that would result in a non-compiling script, and everything would be broken, and you wouldn't be able to do anything. But believe it or not, this is it. This is all we have to do. This is all we have to do in order to be able to make the sound play. So let's check it out. And we're going to go back here inside Unity, and we're going to make sure that we don't have any errors in our console. If we have no errors in our console, then that's good. Remember what I was telling you about that missing semicolon, right? So if I did that and then stop, guess what the console is going to tell me? It's going to tell me, oh, guess what? There's a problem here, on this particular line. I expected this semicolon. So I put the semicolon back. It'll come back. It'll beep again. Oh, sorry. I do have to save. Much save. Saving has to happen. It'll make a little beeping sound, and then it will be gone. And that basically means that we're good to go. Now, what we want to do is we want to find our cube object. It had our trigger sound on it. Now, take a look. This is what I'm talking about. See how it says trigger source, none audio source, and sound audio clip? Right. So that means we can take an audio clip and an audio source to this. Now, our audio source could actually be another physical object inside the space. So you could walk through a trigger, and an audio source could be triggered anywhere inside the physical game space. So you could actually have this send a message effectively to any other game object to play a source. So if you wanted to play a source remotely from, like say 500 feet away or 100 feet away from a character, and you could walk through a trigger, and it would play from the audio source 100 feet away. But in this case, we want it to play locally. So we're basically going to take that cube object, and we're going to drag it all the way over here to the audio source for trigger source. We can just do that, okay? Now, the next thing we need is the sound audio clip. Now, there's one way to do that. We can certainly go here, and we can get our sound. I think it's in the assets folder. It's a little bit over here, but I can show you some examples this way. And this is our sound that we have here. We can also maybe make them a little bit bigger, I guess. It's a little tricky here. To do that, but that's our sound right there, and we can click on that, and you can preview it if you need to. Over here on the right hand side, you can see that this stuff here, that's the trigger. It's very, very basic. I can autoplay, I can loop it. I can't do any editing at all. In fact, you should never ever do any editing in a game engine because it's really kind of not possible. It sort of is possible, but not normally. You'd have to buy assets or obtain assets to be able to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our cube object again, and go to our cube, and we're going to drag our sound over. We can do that one way if we want to. We can just go like this and drag our sound over there. And you see how it highlights there? We can do it that way. And we can also click the little target button, and when we do that, we're going to get a pop-up window, and that will enable us to select the sounds that we want. Okay? So we can do whatever we want in that case. So that's another way to be able to do it. But basically, we're done. This is it, pretty much. This is, as long as it takes here, that's pretty much it. So we're going here, and it automatically played, which we didn't kind of want, right? So we don't really want to play on awake. We want this to only play when we walk through it. So we're going to do that. Okay, so here we go. Oops, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because we didn't turn on the trigger. All right, we got to turn that trigger on. Got to make sure that trigger's on, and then we can go on through this. Okay, and here we go again. And there we go. And we go back through it. All right, and that's basically it. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. Again, we're just explaining the trigger script a little bit in context. Future scripting might be a little bit less, more scripting oriented and little less heavy context oriented. But you need to understand how things are basically working a little bit inside the game engine. And I hope this has been helpful. And if you're interested, please like the video or subscribe if you are interested in that kind of stuff. Leave a comment if you have any questions and stuff like that. We'll be happy to answer that. And if you feel generous, you can fund us on our Patreon. We'd be happy to have your support. All right. Take care, and we'll see you in the next ones.